koutou. My name's Laurie Gordon. I'm one of the staff here at Central Hawke's Bay Museum and one of the crew that put together this exhibition to celebrate 150 years of Ongaonga. On this side of the exhibition, the display is looking at businesses from Ongaonga's past, the Ongaonga Historical Society, and on the other wall there's a series of information panels about some prominent families. So if we start here, this is the classic photo of the Ongaonga Main Street sometime rough after the First World War, showing just what an extraordinary little town it was, with at least 2-3 general stores and a huge number of businesses that made it possible for the farmer community in the mountains to come into town for the day. They didn't need to travel into Waipukaro or Waipawa. The oldest business in Ongaonga is the flour mill that was in Mill Street, which is where it gets its name, of which there is nothing remaining. Ongaonga's most important business, Coles Brothers Builders and Joinery, and the restoration story of the factory there is an important part of the work of the Onga Historic Society. The dairy factory, which was in operation for quite a short time, and finally in the 1970s the Lucerne plant that operated on Highway 50. One of the good things about living in Ongaonga is their very active historical society, and what encourages me is that when I first joined the Historic Society in the middle of the 1990s, there were the group of people who were heavily involved are no longer there, and yet the society still goes on, and there's another generation that have taken the place, and it gives me hope for the future that there will be more people to carry on holding the memories of our community. The village of Ongaonga got its name from the Ongaonga stream, which runs along on one side of the village on the south. According to local Māori, there are many streams in Central Hawke's Bay that are named after plants. So Makaritu is short for Manga Karitu. Karitu is a species of grass. Harakiki, Manga Harakiki again is the stream with the harakiki. The Ongaonga stream similarly was named after the plants that grew in the vicinity, and Ongaonga is a particularly vicious nettle, as you can see from those images that we have here. It's also the host plant for the red admiral butterfly, which is perhaps part of the reason that we're seeing fewer and fewer red admirals around. People are anxious to avoid planting Ongaonga. There's an exhibition on at the moment in Napier at the Hawke's Bay Museum called Hidden in History, about the lives of women who don't get a mention in the written record often. And it'll be coming here to Central Hawke's Bay Museum later in the year. There's a display about some local families, and what I really want to talk about is some of the women who are hidden behind these stories. So first of all, Henry Hamilton Bridge, Bridge Street in Ongaonga is named after him. Ongaonga was established from a corner of his property, Fairfield. He was a large run holder, but behind him is a family story that centres particularly around his mother. So Henry's mother was Elizabeth Howlett. She was married to the Reverend Stephen Bridge. So Henry Hamilton's older brother, Stephen, became a vicar like his father. He was the second son and dreamed of farming. It was through his mother's family that he had the connection to come to New Zealand. So his mother's oldest sister had married Andrew Hamilton Russell, who was in the military and came to New Zealand in the New Zealand Wars period. After he left the military, he purchased land in Hawke's Bay, and it was in the early 1860s Henry Hamilton Bridge got his first job working for his uncle Andrew Hamilton Russell at Mangakuri Station. And it was money from the Russell family that helped finance Henry Hamilton Bridge into his purchase of Fairfield. So it was the Russell family who made that purchase, and that became a source of friction later on. But Henry's mother, Margaret, had a brother who was also a vicar, and their son was Frederick Howlett. He was an interesting character. It seems that he was sent to New Zealand to get him out of the hair of his father, and he spent years as a teacher in Ongaonga and Makaratu. He moved between the two schools, and the Howlett's hut in the Ruahine Ranges is named after him. So there's a whole family story behind, a whole lot of family links behind Henry Hamilton Bridge and his ownership of Fairfield. If we come down here to the Smith family, Rosa Smith spent years in Ongaonga as the local midwife. She is one of only 2 women who are represented in the trade directories of the time, although her profession is not listed. I suppose in the 19th century these things weren't talked about. Women certainly would have known what her role was. She came to Ongaonga with her daughter Laura, who's here, and here in the oldest photo we have from Ongaonga School. So this is the small building that's now part of the museum. Laura is trained as a student teacher, which is how teachers trained in those days, in Napier. She got the job as the sole charge teacher at Ongaonga, and when she was 18, what amazes me about this picture as well is that half of the class come from just 2 families. So there are the Coles family and the Hobbs family. So if we move on to talk about the Coles, Henry Hamilton's Bridge's father, as vicar of Droxford, had some building work done by a local builder called Edward Coles. And so when H.H. Bridge needed a builder for his new village of Ongaonga, he wrote to his father, and his father recommended Edward Coles. So the Coles family came through that link to the Bridge family. What's remarkable, I think, about the Coles family, and a lot of these families, was the size of the family, the number of children that they had. And Clara Coles is a good example. So when the family emigrated, there were 12 children on board the ship, and she with them, and she was pregnant for the whole journey. They arrived in August 1877, and she gave birth in September. And she went on to have another 3 children in New Zealand. Similarly, the Hobbs family, aside from the fact that they had an extremely large family, 14 daughters and 4 sons, when it comes to the Hobbs family, one of the interesting things I found was that their eldest daughter, Mary Jane, was one of only 2 women that I could find, there may be others, who signed the suffrage petition. So the famous petition requesting votes for women that was finally passed in 1893. So the eldest daughter, Mary Jane, signed that suffrage petition. I think probably for daughters in large families, even as young women, they would have been very, very proficient at looking after a family. They would have been a second mother to their younger siblings, and she's a good example. This lovely photo here shows 4 of her sisters on their horse Bessie and travelling to Ongaonga School. So we have Phoebe, Ethel, Rhoda and Ellen Hobbs all travelling, and they had to cross the Tukituki River and the Ongaonga stream to get to school. What was delightful at the opening of the Ongaonga Museum in 1966, Rhoda Hobbs, who was, I think, had become Mrs. Cosgrove, was there for the opening and brought that photograph and some of her memories. And she's also in this photo here with Laura, along with a number of her siblings. This is a map of the Fairfield estate from 1899, when Henry Hamilton Bridge decided to sell up and return to England. So he offered the first subdivision, this is subsequent to the formation of the town of Ongaonga, for sale in 1899. There was a second subdivision, I think, in 1901. Bridge was a supporter of Seddon's Liberals, who had decided to break up the large estates. So rather than having the government force his hand, he broke it up and sold it himself. Bridge had been living for most of the time that he was in New Zealand, actually in the neighbouring estate, to the south, Ashcott estate. John Tucker, who was the owner of Ashcott, had returned to England to find himself a bride, and in doing so, as part of the marriage agreement, changed his name to John Adine. Bridge had been living in Ashcott and had leased that whole property, I think, as a way to generate some income to pay out his Russell relatives so that he would own Fairfield himself. And it was a Russell family relative who managed Fairfield for the time that he was living in Ashcott. While he was living at Ashcott, he was his brother Stuart and his cousin Frederick Howlett spent a lot of time with him there, 3 bachelors together. Although when Bridge returned to England, he was in his 60s, he married a 30-year-old and went on to have 2 sons, but that's another story.